All right. In order for you to fully develop an argument, you cannot just sit where you are and listen to your own voice and your own thoughts. You must imagine what your opponent would bring against you. All arguments are strengthened and made more full through debate. And debate is where argument meets counterargument. So if you want to write a paper, if you want to advance an argument properly, you must always anticipate what your opponent will say against you and deal with those counterarguments proactively. So when I ask you to write this paper, the constructive section is your argument. The rebuttal section is you doing that, you dealing with what counterarguments somebody might levy against you. So what we need to do is understand how to write counterarguments, how to develop counterarguments, and that way you can sort of get into this process of anticipating your weak spots. There are three basic counterargument strategies based upon the Toulmin model that I taught you. All of these, once again, remember the centrality of the Toulmin model in this entire project. Your logic must be the foundation of all your thought. So if you think about your Toulmin model, and if you're taking notes and want to start working on your own and developing questions and suggestions, it's always good to have that Toulmin model in front of you. In fact, sometimes I feel like I want you to print it on every single piece of paper you turn in for me. So I was reading through some constructive drafts, and I was reading some of them and thinking, wait a minute, what's her warrant again, or what's his claim again? I can't exactly remember. It's always helpful to keep that in mind, and vital here. So the first strategy is to counter the Toulmin model, to take a look at somebody's Toulmin model and destroy it. And we'll talk about what that means. The second one is just to propose a separate Toulmin model yourself, one that is, thank you, addresses an issue that the original author ignored. So, for instance, if you were to say, and this is very broad strokes, we'll get into more detail, if you were to say that Southview High School should lower class sizes, or, let me make it a little bit more specific, Southview High School should institute a new rule that class sizes max out at 20 students, with 15 for lab classes. Sounds good, right? That would maximize educational efficiency and probably lead to a better environment for students. So I could run that Toulmin model. I could say Southview should do this. Southview should maximize educational efficiency. This will maximize educational efficiency. What am I ignoring? I'm ignoring the cost. That argument totally ignores cost. So if I were to counter it, if I were an opponent, I would propose a separate argument based upon economics. So the separate argument brings up an issue that they hadn't really thought about, that is not addressed by their Toulmin model. First one does address their Toulmin model and destroys it. Second one proposes a second argument. The third is a little bit less common and sometimes a bit more philosophical in nature. If they are using a term and you define that term differently, then you could challenge their definition of the term. For instance, let's this one, I'll just deal with the challenge definition pretty quickly. Both pro-choice and pro-life camps agree on certain basic assumptions, and they disagree on definitions. What assumptions would they agree on? Pro-life and pro-choice, where do they agree? These two camps are still human beings, right? They're still people, they still are concerned, they still care. Where do they agree? Everybody has individual rights. Absolutely. Both camps agree that people have individual rights. What else do both camps agree on? These people are a lot more similar than you think. Nothing else? Right, that includes the right to life. None of them want to kill children. None of them look at little babies and say, ooh, that would be fun to kill that baby. No matter what the media might portray, none of them want to kill children. So where's the definitional conflict? They differ on the definition of person. They differ on that definition. And some camp define it scientifically, some camp define it philosophically, some camps define it religiously. And then when you get into the religious definitions, those subdivide because different religions define these things differently, and everybody has their own opinion. They have a definitional debate. They do not have a warrant debate. They don't have a debate on basic principles. They have a debate on definitions. And that definitional debate is almost impossible to resolve, which is why we have the conflict that we have. But there you go with the definitional challenge. If somebody is proposing, hey, it is wrong to murder people with no justification, I would say, yeah, I totally agree with that, but I disagree with your definition of people. I disagree with your definition of person. Let's take a look at the first two in more detail. And we'll take a look at the example that I've proposed several times as a model. And that example deals with the outright smoking ban. So the United States federal government should illegalize smoking. Federal government should protect the health of its citizens. Illegalizing smoking would protect the health of U.S. citizens. I want to destroy this first. What does it mean to destroy a Toulmin model? How do you destroy something like this? Not quite. It's a little bit simpler than that. It doesn't require analysis and breaking down into parts. Taylor? I'm not going to change anything. I provide counter evidence to show what? What? You're looking too generally. What am I trying to do to the grounds? Prove it to be false. Right. Remember what I told you about logical validity with this model? If this is true and this is true, what necessarily follows? The claim is true. And we could demonstrate that mathematically. You could throw Venn diagrams up there. There are all sorts of logic models to demonstrate that that is the truth. That's the case. If this is true and this is true, this must be true. Destroying the Toulmin model means you show one of them to be false. If this is false or this is false, the whole thing falls. So all you got to do is prove that one of these is false. Which one do you want to attack? Which one do you think would be easier to prove false? I think so too. So what we do is we prove the grounds to be false. Anybody have an idea on how to do that? Illegalizing smoking would protect the health of U.S. citizens. Zach? I'm sorry? Sure, a study that shows what? That's fine. You're right that you want to lock it in with some objective evidence. Claire? Very good. How could that be? I'm illegalizing smoking across the United States. How could that not have an impact on health of citizens? The prohibition effect. You illegalize a substance that people are addicted to and they're obsessed with. It doesn't mean that they'll stop. It simply means what? They'll do it illegally. So my counter-argument right now proves the grounds to be false by stating that illegalizing smoking will simply push smokers underground, and furthermore, it could lead them to other drugs that they would use to supplant that smoking urge. Also, you know any other health effects of people who quit smoking? Health impacts? They often gain weight. They often gain weight, and this can turn into an unhealthy consequence of quitting smoking, which is why people who quit smoking should always do so with regular exercise and other sort of diet and health regimen. But you could provide a number of details and facts that would show, no, you illegalize smoking and you've got a bigger problem. And all I've got to do is hold up the specter of prohibition and I'll prove it. My second counter-argument strategy is to provide a counter Toulmin model, something that they haven't really paid attention to here. This is a health argument. It's all about health. What about rights? So here's my separate argument. Notice that the claim has changed. The United States federal government should keep smoking legal. So now I am providing my own counter-argument to bring up an issue that the original author hadn't paid attention to, and that new information is the right to privacy. Now I've got a warrant battle on my hands. What's more important, health or privacy? Can you speak to that conflict in our society? What's more important, safety and health or privacy? Can you show any places where that has come into conflict? Where the government has decided, you know what, we're going to put in this rule that will keep people safe or that keep them healthy, but opponents say, yeah, but you're invading my privacy. Denise, the Patriot Act is one of your best examples from the last 15 years, where the US government said, you know what, we will curtail some civil liberties and rights to privacy because the specter of terrorism is too powerful to ignore. And right after 9/11, trust me, the American public was looking at that saying, yeah, okay, most of the American public, saying that's fine. And so the Patriot Act received bipartisan support. But that's your right to privacy safety concern. And if you wanted to attack the anti-smoking argument, you'd simply say, the right to privacy outweighs this. People have a right to smoke if they wish to, and you cannot interfere with those civil liberties. Two ways to attack this original argument. And if I'm successful with either, or I use both, then the original author really has no case. That's where it becomes debate. Who would like to suggest theirs? Let's try to take something down. I want to hear new voices. George, we never hear from you. And as much as you want to look down at your desk, I will pick on you today. There you go. Let's hold on a second here. Go ahead and type your claim for me, please. Sorry, let me give you move. There you go. Remove military forces from where? Okay. Why don't we throw that in there just to specify? Remove military forces from, okay, Libya, good. And focus on the economy. And what's your warrant? The U.S. should what? That's what I was thinking. I thought let's do this. Let's just delete that. Okay, good. And then your warrant is what? The United States should maintain the economy, something like that. Okay. Good. And then your grounds. What's his grounds? An interesting answer, more like a cultist chant, which I always appreciate. Removing military forces from Libya. Let's soften it a little bit. Will help the United States maintain the economy. So otherwise your opponents are going to go after you saying it's going to take more than that. Yep, the economy. Now, what George must do in his planning, what all of you must do in your planning, is imagine that you are your own opponent. And actually, I've got an activity next week in which all of you will kind of be paired off and countering each other's arguments. You'll be debating with each other. But right now, let's practice it with George's. So imagine that we want to prove him to be wrong. We want to prove that claim to be false. Let's try the destroying the Toulmin model first. Where do you want to go? Warrant or grounds? Grounds. Okay, how do we prove the grounds to be false? I like that, thank you. And I think that there's some truth in that. Now, more precise analysis would be required to determine whether or not these expenditures help the economy. But I think broadly, you're right, that military expenditures help the economy. They provide jobs, and contracts for industry and so on and so forth. Good. Any other way to prove that to be false?
You could compare like what effect like us being in the Libya has had compared to like other stuff that's had more of an effect on the economy. So you can prove that that isn't really that very effective.
Okay. So let me see if I understand this, Jordan. You're saying that, well, the economy is in a shambles for other reasons. Can you give me one of those reasons why the economy is in a shambles? Come on, help out. Why are we in the state that we're in? I'm sorry? Okay. That's probably not going to lead to focused policy decisions. But the housing crisis would probably be experimental investment in products like dividends. Or sorry, not dividends. What am I thinking? Derivatives. Derivatives and other sorts of financial speculation were risky and they failed. So financial speculation was a big problem that led to a collapse. Any other contributing factors to economic collapse right now? What else besides Wall Street? Huh? So, well, the military connection to that. So we're talking about Iraq and Afghanistan, right? Expenditures in Iraq and Afghanistan have thrown our military budget out of all compass. It's overblown, and that's really what's thrown us into debt as well. So we have a number of different factors. So what Jordan wants to say is that the expenditures in Libya are minor, and so taking them away will not really help. These expenditures are a minor part of the problem. They will not, and taking them away will not help the economy. It's a drop in the bucket, and removing it does not really provide anything. All right, good enough. Separate argument. Well, hold on one second. Let's start with the claim. The claim would be U.S. should maintain Libyan operations. So basically saying that we want to keep the military operations in Libya. Go ahead.
I just have a question.
Oh, go ahead.
So are we creating a whole new warrant in Israel?
Yes. Yes. New warrant, new grounds. Remember what I said with the smoking example. My smoking argument was a health argument. The health argument ignores privacy. So in my separate argument, I bring up a new warrant. I say, hey, there's a value you ignored, and that value is privacy. This one should develop a new warrant as well. What is he ignoring when he talks about economy? Safety of Libyan citizens? If the U.S. should protect its citizens, then what is my grounds? Okay. Maintaining Libyan operations will protect U.S. citizens. I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to prove that, except very indirectly, right? Anybody familiar with what Gaddafi and Libya was involved with in the 80s regarding terrorist attacks? Reagan bombed him. I remember watching the breaking news special as Reagan came over, interrupted programming to say, hey, American bombers are right now attacking Libya. And nobody knows why. Yeah.
Libya supported a whole bunch of terrorists.
And most specifically, it was directly linked to the Lockerbie jet bombing over Ireland. I believe it was Ireland. No. This was part of why Gaddafi was bombed. So there was a direct connection. In fact, the guy who was responsible just returned to Libya a couple years ago, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Finally. Yeah, out of prison. Was it that recent?
Yeah.
Okay. So Libyan connection to terrorism, we could show an indirect effect by saying that, hey, Libya is responsible for terrorist attacks, but I'm not sure that we have recent evidence of that. We have evidence in the 80s, absolutely, but I'm not sure that we have recent evidence. So it might not protect U.S. citizens. What other warrant then could we come up with? Why else are we there?
Say the U.S. has the right to protect citizens, like regardless of our citizens or not, like protect the right of humans.
So, oh, good. U.S. should protect, what was that? Yeah, good. This is the moral policeman of the world, right? This is that factor where we say we enlightened first world nations, those invested in democracy and capitalism, have a responsibility to protect the rights to democracy and capitalism for the rest of the world against the evil aggressors and forces of communism, autocracy, totalitarianism, blah, 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 blah. And therefore, maintaining Libyan operations will help us protect human rights. Good. George has got to deal with the human rights argument, and I think this is one of the most powerful. I think that people who disagree with George would say, yeah, but you know what? We're going to keep spending money because we have a moral obligation to do so. One quick question before I move from George's argument to something else. What usually wins in the real world, the moral argument or the economic argument? In the halls of power, in Congress, in legislation, in selling to the people, what usually wins, the money or the morality? The money. You know, the morality makes good copy on the advertising and the campaigns, but generally it's the economy that will sway votes and support. So George might be dealing with a stronger argument if he can prove to me that taking operations out of Libya will make an impact on the U.S. economy. Now what George has to do, now that he has notes, and he'll have some assistance from other people next week to possibly develop some further counterarguments, is in his rebuttal section he must think about how he would address that. And the rebuttal section will go something like this. Supporters of the Libyan operation claim that the United States is involved to protect human rights abroad. They claim that the United States, in its power as a first world nation and possibly the only superpower left, has a moral obligation to protect the human rights of disadvantaged peoples throughout the world. He presents their argument. And then he provides a transition. However, and then he deals with it. However he wants to deal with it. So the rebuttal section would say, my opponents say this, but here's my response. And what he's going to do is take his notes from a session like today and use that to frame his rebuttal section. The rebuttal section is relatively small. I believe it's, anybody know the word?
300, 400,
I think it's a little bit, I thought it was, yeah, minimum 400 if I remember correctly. So it's not a huge section. And George should have more than enough to deal with there. Another? Okay. Caitlin, remind us of your claim.
The federal government should evaluate all citizens for home.
Right. Is it a health or safety argument?
Yeah.
Okay. And then blah, blah, blah. You know what the grounds would be. Okay, so Caitlin, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but Caitlin's arguing that the federal government should help people understand whether or not they should be on a home care plan in order to prevent the accidents that usually lead to health problems and other sorts of safety risks for senior citizens. Is that correct? Okay. So it's a federal program that she is endorsing. How might you attack this argument? How might you just try to destroy her original Toulmin model? The grounds would be that evaluating senior citizens for a home health care plan will protect health and safety. Can anybody attack the warrant? We haven't done that so far. Is the federal government responsible for protecting private health and safety at this level? Silence. Speak. It could depend upon your political beliefs. If you were a strict small government advocate, what do you believe the government's responsibility is? Yeah, providing for the national defense, right? Providing for the national defense and basically dealing with overt, extreme threats to citizen safety and political rights. And that's about it. Now, if I were mounting this sort of if I were mounting this ideological argument, I might say that the federal government should not and has no mandate to be involved in health at this sort of level. So the federal government should stay out of my health decisions, even if interfering with those health decisions helps my health. It's a rights thing. The federal government does not have the mandate or the warrant to be involved at this level. So I could go after the warrant. Now the grounds, and I've read Caitlin's constructive, she's got some fairly decent evidence there, so there would have to be counter evidence showing that home health or evaluation for home health care plan will not actually provide any of these benefits. So what's the counter argument? What is she ignoring?
The rights, like their right to have their own home and live in their own.
Okay. Privacy. I think privacy would be a counter Toulmin model that you might deal with. So somebody might say the federal government should not evaluate seniors for a home health care plan. Federal government should protect privacy rights of families and individuals, and not evaluating them will protect privacy rights. And I think that that's a looming counter-argument for you, is the privacy issue. Because when I read yours originally, here's the reaction I had. Man, there's some portions of our society that hate the federal government even knowing that we exist. They hate the federal government having information about us, telling us how to live, what to do, and so on. And they'll accept certain restrictions, but they do not like the federal government saying, hey, you should do this. You should invest in a home health care plan. You should get health insurance. You should do this and this and this. So that camp is articulate and large enough that you should probably anticipate that attack. Okay? Probably have time for one more. Yeah, Allie, what are you dealing with again?
Government should hold bar owners and employees liable for the effects caused by existing.
What's your warrant?
State government should protect the health and safety of citizens.
Okay. And then this is I'm going to break this down into a liability issue. So Allie's arguing that bar owners should be liable. So liability will where's my strategy in the grounds attack? So if I'm going after the grounds attack, and her grounds state that if I hold bar owners responsible for the damage caused by drunk drivers, then there will be fewer drunk drivers on the road. How would Allie prove that? Yes.
Rather than just going to the party someone else.
Very good. That's an excellent observation, Jordan. So Jordan's saying that she would have to have comparative statistics on how many drunk drivers exit bars versus how many drunk drivers exit private parties or some other sort of environment. That would be interesting. So if you were to show that the drunk drivers exiting bars under liability are lower. So when we have this, let me back up because Allie and I know what we're talking about. This restriction currently exists. She's arguing for a policy that is on the books. Have you been able to read that policy for Ohio? Okay, good. So she's arguing a policy that is currently on the books right now, and that is that in Ohio, bar owners and employees are responsible for this. When did that go into effect?
The date that I saw was like 1989.
If you had stats from accidents before that versus after that, there's your true comparison, right? Where you say that, oh, suddenly drunk driving accidents and damage decreased because, as Jordan's pointing out, the number of people exiting bars drunk and getting into a car decreased. If you can show that, you're good. If I want to attack you, I show that there's no change. So your counter-argument strategy would be talking about how it has changed. There is a decrease. Okay, so this is, if I want to prove your grounds to be false, then I say before liability and after liability, there's no significant change. People are still driving drunk and there's not a big difference. So, and why that would be, I don't know. Maybe liability is difficult to enforce, it's difficult to prove in a court of law, so nobody goes after it. I don't know why. But my counter-argument strategy is to prove that this is false, and that's how I would do it. What separate argument might there be? Kim? I could argue that people are responsible for their own actions. In other words, I'm saying this is not a case in which liability holds true. What is liability? Liability is this legal concept that I am responsible for something. And in this context, it's that I am responsible for the actions of another person. When am I responsible for the actions of another person? Okay, you're not lawyers, right? So just give me your untutored, unschooled opinion on that. When should I be held legally responsible for the actions of another person, for the damaging actions of another person? Taylor? Oh, excellent. Okay, so if they are incompetent, because children are technically incompetent. So if they are incompetent and you are legally responsible for them, you should be held liable. Good. If you are promoting the actions, actively encouraging criminality. Yes, good. By the way, so far neither of those covers this situation. I'm sorry?
Like if you have someone that's working on you.
Oh, okay. Interesting. So the child parent thing is pretty clear. The employee-employer relationship's interesting. So if somebody's working under you, you are responsible. So, well, let's put this in a context right here. So if I suddenly go nuts and start punching students, does that mean that Mr. McMurray is liable because he's my most direct supervisor? I don't know. Possibly. I guess that would be difficult to hold unless we could show that his failure to do something has resulted in me going nuts, right? Why? So it's kind of like what Claire's talking about with encouraging. They are giving you the substance that enables you. So does that mean that the seller of a gun should be held liable for a guy who buys the gun and then commits a criminal act with it? Okay, so let's use this comparison. If I sell a gun to somebody and I'm able to know that they're about to use it improperly, then I should be held liable. So if a guy comes up to me and says, I want to buy a handgun, I say, okay, what are you going to use it for? And he says, I intend to rob liquor stores. now I'm liable. But if he says, well, I'm going target shooting.
Well, yeah, I can do it now.
Sure. Okay. Good. So, no, Emma, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just trying to see it. And I think what Emma's saying here is that I, as a business owner, know that the person will use my product for a criminal purpose, and therefore I am knowledgeable about it, and I can do something about it. So I am liable for his or her actions. That's a good definition of liability, I think. So the counter would try to counter-define liability.